afraid of you. I do not fear you.
Chapter 1 opens in the hill country of Ephraim. We meet a man named Elkanah from Ramathaim Zophim. He goes up year after year to worship and sacrifice at Shiloh. This matters because Shiloh was the heartbeat of worship back then. The tabernacle stood there, and the house of Eli served there. But before the story reveals the rot within that priestly family, it drops us into a household where faithfulness still survives amidst a nation's weakness. Elkanah has 2 wives. There is Peninnah, who has children, and Hannah, who has none. The text makes it clear Hannah's barrenness is not just some minor footnote. It is the wound that drives the entire opening movement of the book. Year after year, as the family travels to the house of the Lord, Peninnah taunts Hannah relentlessly because the Lord had closed her womb. The place that should have been holy becomes a place of bitter humiliation. The sacrifice is being offered. The family meal is happening. But Hannah is drowning in a grief that no amount of food can fix. Elkanah loves her and gives her a double portion. He tries to comfort her, asking if he isn't more to her than sons. But the story reveals the limits of human comfort. Elkanah's love is real, but it can't heal Hannah's anguish. His words can't open the womb. His love can't silence Peninnah's cruelty. So Hannah makes the move that changes everything. She rises. The scene shifts to the sanctuary at Shiloh, where Eli the priest is sitting by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Hannah enters with a bitter soul, weeping as she prays to the Lord. This isn't a casual request. It's not polished religious talk. It's the prayer of someone who has hit rock bottom. She makes a vow, begging the Lord of hosts to look upon her, suffering, remember her, and grant her a son. And if God blesses her with a son, she promises to give him back to the Lord for all his days. This vow is huge. Hannah isn't using a child to secure her status. In a culture where being barren meant shame, she asks for a son, only to offer him back to God immediately. Her prayer is deeply personal, yet selfless. The child she longs for will actually become part of God's answer to Israel's greater crisis. As Hannah prays silently, only her lips move. Eli watches her and gets it wrong. He thinks she is drunk. This moment quietly reveals something deeply wrong with the spiritual health of Shiloh. The priest who should discern the heart of a faithful woman sees only disorder. Hannah has to set the record straight. She tells him she hasn't been drinking. She is a woman in deep distress, pouring out her soul to the Lord. Eli tells her to go in peace, praying that the God of Israel grants her petition. Hannah leaves transformed. Her face is no longer sad. Nothing has changed yet. She isn't pregnant. The circumstances are identical. But she has laid her burden before the Lord, and faith has replaced her sorrow. The next morning, the family worships before the Lord and heads back to Ramah. In time, the Lord remembers Hannah. She conceives and bears a son. She names him Samuel because she had asked for him from the Lord. His name is his testimony. Every time we say Samuel, we remember how his story began. He isn't the product of political ambition or institutional power. He is the answer to a prayer. When it is time for Elkanah to go up for the annual sacrifice, Hannah stays behind. She waits until the boy is weaned. Then she will take him to appear before the Lord and stay there forever. This is one of the most powerful scenes in the start of 1 Samuel. Hannah receives the son she begged for, raises him through his early years, and keeps the vow she made through tears. When Samuel is old enough, she brings him to Shiloh with sacrifices. She approaches Eli to remind him of that day. She is the woman who stood there praying. She tells him God answered her request. Now she gives him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to God. This isn't abandonment. In the biblical world, keeping a vow to God was an act of covenant loyalty. Hannah isn't losing Samuel. She is placing him into the service of the Lord. In the bigger picture, this act paves the way for Samuel to rise as a prophet, judge, and leader when Israel desperately needs a faithful voice. The story moves into chapter 2, where Hannah prays again. But this time her prayer isn't the silent cry of a broken heart. It's a song of victory. Her heart rejoices in the Lord. Her strength is exalted in Him. She declares there is no one holy like the Lord, no rock like our God. The woman who was mocked now sings with total clarity. Her own deliverance becomes a window into how God rules history. Hannah's prayer sets the theme for the entire book. The bows of the mighty are shattered, but the weak find strength. Those who were full now work for bread, while the hungry are satisfied. The barren woman has many children, while the mother of many fades away. The Lord kills and gives life. He brings down to the grave and raises up. He makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and lifts high. This is more than just a celebration of Samuel's birth. It is the theology of 1 Samuel sung before the events unfold. God sees what people ignore. God elevates what people discard. He humbles the proud and bolsters the weak. This matters because the book will show Israel learning the hard way that appearances deceive. A priestly house can look established while collapsing from within. A king can look impressive but remain unfaithful. A shepherd boy can look like nothing yet be chosen by God. Hannah's song reaches far beyond her own life. She declares, "The Lord protects His faithful, silences the wicked, judges the earth, and empowers His king, and exalts the strength of His anointed." Israel has no king yet, but this prayer looks ahead. The book, starting with a barren woman praying at Shiloh, moves toward the need for a leader who can truly stand before God. The section ends quietly. Elkanah goes home to Ramah, but young Samuel stays to serve the Lord under Eli. That simple sentence carries the weight of history. In the same sanctuary where Eli sits, his house will soon fall, while a child of prayer begins his service. Israel doesn't see what God is doing. Eli doesn't grasp the true significance of the boy growing up right before him. But the narrative has already begun the shift. When the established priesthood falters, God raises a faithful servant from the most unexpected place. We move from Hannah's prayer to the spiritual state of the sanctuary. First, the story reveals that God is raising Samuel from the shadows. Now we see why this new voice is vital. In the second chapter, the scene stays at Shiloh, near the house of the Lord. But the air has changed. Samuel serves as a boy, while Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are labeled worthless men who do not know the Lord. This contrast drives the narrative. Where Israel should find holiness, worship, and truth, corruption sits at the altar. The text exposes their sin in grim detail. When people offer sacrifices, a servant arrives with a three-pronged fork to snatch meat for the priests. But Hophni and Phinehas demand even more. Before the fat is burned to the Lord, they insist on raw meat. If the worshiper refuses, they threaten to take it by force. A holy act of worship turns into a display of greed and contempt. This matters because these sacrifices weren't just meals. They were part of Israel's covenant worship. The fat belonged to the Lord. By taking God's portion first, Eli's sons weren't just acting out. They were despising the Lord's offering. The rot wasn't outside the sanctuary. It was inside. Yet in that darkness, the focus keeps shifting back to Samuel. While the priests serve themselves, Samuel serves the Lord in a linen ephod. Every year his parents bring the sacrifice, and his mother brings him a small, handmade robe. A quiet, powerful image. A faithful mother, a growing child. A sanctuary facing judgment, and God preparing the future 1 year at a time. Eli blesses the family, and the Lord grants Hannah more children. Meanwhile, Samuel continues to grow in the presence of the Lord. The book carefully balances two paths. One line is collapsing under the weight of sin. The other is rising under the hand of God. Still, in chapter 2, Eli is very old. He hears reports of everything his sons are doing, including their abuse of the women serving at the tent entrance. Eli confronts them, warning that if a man sins against another, God may mediate. But if he sins against the Lord, who can intercede? They don't listen. It is a heartbreaking moment. Eli rebukes his sons, but his correction is too weak and far too late. The problem isn't that Eli is ignorant. The problem is he fails to stop the corruption in his own home. In Israel, leadership meant more than just talking. It meant guarding what was holy. Then a man of God comes to Eli with a word of judgment. The message looks back to the past and forward to the future. God reminds Eli that he chose their line to serve at the altar, but they have honored themselves above him. The verdict is harsh. The strength of Eli's house will be broken. His descendants will fall, and Hophni and Phinehas will die on the same day. The priesthood meant to guard Israel is now under God's sentence. Yet the warning carries a promise. God will raise up a faithful priest, one who will act according to God's own heart. The book isn't just about collapse. It's about a new beginning. When one house fails, God stays in control. He prepares a new servant. The story moves to chapter 3, and the tone grows hushed. Young Samuel serves the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. Visions were not frequent. This isn't just a historical note. It describes Israel's spiritual state. The sanctuary is busy. Sacrifices happen. Priests are there. But the prophetic voice is missing. One night, Eli lies down, his eyesight beginning to fail. The lamp of God is still burning. Samuel sleeps in the temple near the ark of God. Then the Lord calls Samuel. Samuel runs to Eli, thinking the old man called. Eli says he didn't and sends him back to sleep. This happens a second time. Again Samuel runs to Eli. Again he is sent back. A third time it happens. Finally, Eli realizes the Lord is calling the boy. He tells Samuel to say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." The Lord comes and calls again. Samuel answers. And Samuel's first prophetic word is not easy. It is a judgment against Eli's house. God confirms he will do something in Israel that will make everyone's ears tingle. The announced judgment is coming. Because Eli's sons blasphemed God and Eli failed to restrain them, Samuel stays in bed until morning, afraid to tell Eli the vision. But Eli calls him and demands the truth. Samuel tells him everything, hiding nothing. Eli responds, "He is the Lord, let him do what is good." The priest accepts the verdict, but the sentence stands. From then on, Samuel grows, and the Lord is with him. None of his words fail. All Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knows Samuel is the Lord's chosen prophet. At Shiloh, the Lord continues to reveal himself to Samuel through his word. This is a major turning point. Samuel is no longer just the boy Hannah gave to God. He is now publicly recognized as Israel's prophetic voice. In an era of failed priestly leadership, the word of the Lord returns through a boy who learned to listen. 1 Samuel chapter 4 shifts from the sanctuary to the battlefield. Israel faces the Philistines camping at Ebenezer, while their enemies hold Aphek. Israel loses the first clash, with 4,000 men dead. The elders wonder why the Lord let them fall. Instead of repenting, they grab a religious token. They bring the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh, hoping it will save them from their enemies. Hophni and Phinehas arrive with the Ark. When it enters the camp, the Israelite soldiers shout so loudly the earth shakes. The Philistines hear the noise and panic, remembering how God struck Egypt. Driven by desperation, they fight with even greater ferocity. The Ark represented God's presence, but Israel treats it like a lucky charm. The issue isn't the Ark, it's their lack of reverence. They try to use a symbol of God while ignoring His holiness. 1 Samuel makes this point very clear. Sacred objects cannot shield a people who abandon the covenant. The battle becomes a massacre. Israel is defeated again. Hophni and Phinehas are killed, just as prophesied. Even worse, the Ark of God is captured. It is one of the darkest hours in Israel's history. The enemy hasn't just won a fight. They have seized the visible sign of the Lord's very presence. A man from Benjamin bolts from the front lines toward Shiloh, his clothes torn and dirt smeared on his head. Old Eli sits by the road, his heart trembling for the Ark. When the messenger enters the city, wails. Eli asks what happened. The news comes in waves. Israel fled the battle. There has been a great slaughter. Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead. Then the final blow. The Ark is taken. Eli falls backward, breaks his neck, and dies. He judged Israel for 40 years, but his family line ends under the weight of divine judgment. The tragedy hits home. The wife of Phinehas is near her time. When she hears the Ark is captured and that her husband and father-in-law are gone, she goes into labor. Dying, the women tell her not to fear, for she has a son. She ignores them. She names the child Ichabod, saying the glory has departed from Israel because of the Ark and the deaths of the priests. That name casts a long shadow. Ichabod literally means the glory has departed. The collapse of Eli's house is more than a family tragedy. It is a national spiritual crisis. The priesthood is finished. The Ark is gone. Israel learned the hard way that you cannot manipulate God's presence while your heart is compromised. Yet even in this dark ending, hope remains. Eli's house is falling, but Samuel has been called. The Ark is captured, but God is not defeated. The glory may seem gone, but the Lord is still in control. The Ark is gone, the priests are dead, and Israel sits in silence. But the story doesn't stay with them. The camera follows the Ark into enemy territory. 1 Samuel shows that the Lord needs no army to defend His own glory. In chapter 5, the Philistines take the Ark from Ebenezer to Ashdod. They place it inside the temple of Dagon, right next to their idol. To the Philistines, this looks like victory. They think their God has conquered Israel's. The Ark sits like a trophy beneath their idol. But the next morning, the people of Ashdod find Dagon lying face down on the floor before the Ark of the Lord. They prop the idol back up. It is a quiet, humiliating scene. Their God has to be lifted by human hands. The Philistine idol cannot even stand in the presence of the Ark. The following morning, Dagon is down again. This time, his head and hands are severed on the threshold. This isn't a battle of equal gods. The text proves the Lord's total superiority. Dagon falls without Israel raising a finger, without Samuel speaking, and without any human defense. The Lord is not trapped inside the Ark. Then judgment moves from the temple to the city. The hand of the Lord turns against the people of Ashdod. Panic and sickness sweep the city. The Philistines realize the Ark of Israel's God cannot stay there. They ship it to Gath. But when the Ark arrives, the same terror follows. The hand of the Lord strikes the city, and panic erupts. They send it away again, this time to Ekron. But when it arrives, the people of Ekron cry out in fear, saying the Ark has been brought to kill them all. The victory trophy has become a lethal curse. The Philistines wanted to flaunt Israel's defeat, but every city that takes the ark becomes a witness to the Lord's power. Moving into chapter 6, the ark has been in Philistine territory for 7 months. The leaders call their priests and diviners to find a way to return it. They are told to send it back with a guilt offering. They craft golden images of the plagues, place them with the ark, and hitch it to 2 milk cows that have never been yoked. The calves are separated, and the ark is placed on the cart. This serves as a test for the Philistines. If the cows head straight for Israel and reach Beth Shemesh, they will know this disaster came from the Lord. If not, they will call it chance. The cows head straight toward Beth Shemesh, lowing the entire way, never veering left or right. The Philistine rulers follow them to the border, watching the truth unfold. The people of Beth Shemesh are harvesting wheat. They look up, spot the ark, and pure joy erupts. The cart enters a field and stops beside a large stone. The people break the wood for fuel and offer the cows as a burnt sacrifice to the Lord. Levites remove the ark and the box of gold. The Philistine rulers watch it all, then head back to Ekron. For a moment it feels like restoration. The ark is home. The people rejoice. Sacrifices rise again to the Lord. But the story reminds us that holy things require reverence. Some men of Beth Shemesh look upon the ark and judgment strikes. Joy turns to terror. They ask, who can stand before this holy God? It isn't that God rejects his people after the ark's return. The lesson is that Israel must not treat the ark with carelessness. The Philistines tried to keep it as a trophy. Earlier, Israel tried to use it as a weapon. Now Beth Shemesh learns that the Lord's presence is not common or casual. Covenant privilege doesn't bypass holy fear. The men of Beth Shemesh send word to Kiriath Jearim, asking them to come and take the ark. The men of Kiriath Jearim bring it to the house of Abinadab and consecrate his son Eleazar to guard it. The ark stays there for years as Israel mourns after the Lord. Moving into 1 Samuel chapter 7, the ark remains at Kiriath Jearim, and Samuel speaks to all of Israel. His message is blunt. If they are truly returning to the Lord with all their hearts, they must cast away foreign gods and the Ashtaroth. Turn your hearts toward the Lord and serve him only. Then he will deliver you from the Philistines. This is the turning point. Israel's issue isn't just military weakness, it is spiritual compromise. The nation cannot just recover the ark and live divided between the Lord and idols. Bringing the ark back means nothing without a heart that returns to God. The people clear out the idols and serve the Lord alone. Samuel gathers all of Israel at Mizpah. They pour out water before the Lord, fast, and confess their sins. Samuel judges the people there. This isn't a battlefield. It is an altar of repentance. Before facing the enemy, Israel faces its own sin. When the Philistines hear Israel has gathered at Mizpah, they march up to attack. Fear ripples through the crowd. They beg Samuel, "Do not stop crying to the Lord for us, so he may save us." This is a massive shift from chapter 4. Back then, Israel shouted because the ark arrived, but they lacked repentance. Now they tremble, confess, and ask for prayer. Samuel offers a nursing lamb as a whole burnt offering. He cries out for Israel, and the Lord answers. As he makes the offering, the Philistines rush to attack, but the Lord thunders with a mighty roar against them that day, throwing them into complete chaos. They are defeated. Victory comes not by magic or treating the ark like a lucky charm, or through empty religious noise. Victory follows repentance, confession, and the mercy of God. Israel chases the Philistines down. Samuel sets up a stone between Mizpah and Shen, calling it Ebenezer, declaring that until now the Lord has helped them. The name Ebenezer takes on new weight. Before, near Ebenezer, Israel lost because they treated the ark with arrogance. Now Samuel raises a monument because the Lord truly helped his repentant people. That same ground, once a site of defeat, becomes a testimony of dependence. The chapter concludes by highlighting Samuel's leadership. The Philistines are suppressed and do not cross Israel's borders during Samuel's lifetime. Lost cities are returned to Israel, and there is peace with the Amorites. Samuel continues to lead Israel his entire life. Every year he travels a circuit to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, judging the people. He always returns to his home in Ramah, where he built an altar to the Lord. By the end of this period, the book has completed a major shift. The house of Eli has fallen. The ark is back. The Philistines know their gods cannot defeat the Lord. Israel knows the Lord cannot be manipulated by sacred symbols. Samuel stands as the faithful judge, prophet, and intercessor who guides the nation back to the covenant. The story leaves the victory at Mizpah and moves toward a massive turning point. Samuel has led with deep faithfulness, but the people are about to demand a new kind of leadership. Not because God failed them, but because they want to blend in with every other nation. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, Samuel is old. He makes his sons judges, but they do not follow his example. They chase dishonest game, take bribes, and twist justice. The elders of Israel gather and go to Samuel at Ramah. Their complaints start with something real. Samuel is old and his sons are corrupt. But the solution they propose reveals a deeper, darker problem. They demand, "Appoint a king to judge us like all the nations." These words feel like poison to Samuel. He is deeply hurt, not just by the demand for a government, but by what it exposes. Israel wasn't meant to be just another nation. Israel was a people formed by covenant, saved from Egypt, led through the desert, and ruled by the Lord. Their identity rested on one truth: God was their king. Samuel prays. The Lord answers with painful clarity. Listen to them. They have not rejected you. They have rejected the Lord as their king. This sentence sets the stage for everything that follows. It is not just about having a king. It is about mistrust. They want visible security. They want a throne like the nations. The Bible does not label kingship as evil. Back in Israel's history, the law already allowed for a king. The issue in 1 Samuel is the heart behind the request. Israel is impatient. They want to look like their neighbors and avoid the vulnerability of trusting an unseen God. God tells Samuel to warn them clearly, show them the ways of a king. Samuel speaks plainly. A king will take your sons for his chariots, his army, and his cavalry. He will force others to plow his fields or harvest his grain and forge his weapons of war. He will take your daughters for royal labor. He will seize the best of your land, your vines, orchards, servants, and livestock. The repeating theme is taking. The king they want will not just protect, he will consume. Yet the people refuse to listen. They insist, saying, "We want a king, so we can be like other nations, have someone to judge us, and see him lead us into battle." It is a tragic moment. The Lord had always fought for them. He delivered them from Egypt, fed them in the wild, crushed the Philistines, and raised up judges. But now they want a human face for their security. Samuel listens and reports their demand to the Lord. The Lord tells him to give them what they asked for. The chapter ends on a somber note. The people head home, but a line has been crossed. Israel has traded direct reliance on God for the risks of a monarchy. The story moves to 1 Samuel chapter 9, shifting from the assembly to a simple search in the country. A Benjamite named Kish has a son named Saul. Saul is tall, handsome, and striking, a standout among the people, head and shoulders taller than any other man in Israel. This matters because Saul looks the part. He is impressive, physically dominant, and from a tribe with a complex past. Kish loses his donkeys, so he sends Saul and a servant to find them. They travel through many regions but find nothing. Saul eventually wants to turn back, fearing his father will stop worrying about the animals and start worrying about him. But the servant mentions a man of God nearby, a respected seer whose words always come true. Maybe he can help. This is God working behind the scenes. Saul thinks he is just finding livestock, but God already told Samuel he would send him a man, and Samuel is to anoint him as prince over Israel. They asked for a king, and God is directing Saul's ordinary journey toward Samuel. It is a quiet, powerful tension. Saul's rise is a response to a flawed request, yet it remains under God's sovereign hand. God is still in control. But getting what you demand is not always the same as getting what is best. As Saul draws near, the Lord tells Samuel, "This is the man who shall govern my people." Samuel honors Saul, feeds him at the high place, gives him the best meat, and talks with him on the roof. Saul went out for donkeys and found a destiny he never sought. At dawn, Samuel tells the servant to leave so they can speak. In chapter 10, Samuel takes a flask of oil and pours it on Saul's head. He kisses him, confirming Saul is now prince over God's inheritance. Samuel gives him signs. Donkeys found men carrying offerings and prophets. When Saul meets the prophets, the Spirit of the Lord will rush on him. He will prophesy and become a different man. As Saul leaves, God changes his heart. Every sign Samuel gave comes to pass that day. When the Spirit of God rushes over Saul, he begins to prophesy. People who knew him were shocked and asked, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" It shows how drastic the change was. Saul is being marked by something beyond his looks. The man who looked the part is now touched by the Spirit for his new task. Yet when Saul gets home, he stays quiet about the kingdom. The secret remains hidden for a moment. Soon, Samuel calls the people to the Lord at Mizpah. This assembly returns to a place of memory. At Mizpah, they once found deliverance. Now they are receiving their requested king. Samuel reminds them of the Lord's work. He brought them out of Egypt and rescued them from every nation that oppressed them, but they rejected the God who saves them from all their troubles. The selection by tribe and clan begins. The tribe of Benjamin is chosen. The clan of Matri is picked. Saul is named, but Saul is nowhere to be found. They ask the Lord where he is. The Lord reveals that Saul is hiding among the baggage. They run and drag him out. Standing among them, he towers over everyone. Samuel asks, "Do you see him, the man chosen by the Lord? There is no one like him." The people shout, "Long live the king!" Tension hangs in the air. Saul looks the part, exactly the kind of royal figure Israel wanted. Yet he hides among the baggage a hint of inner doubt. People see his height. God sees the heart. Samuel writes down the rights and duties of kingship, leaves the scroll before the Lord, and sends the people home. Some valiant men, hearts stirred by God, follow Saul. But others despise him, questioning his ability to save them. Saul remains silent. The story enters 1 Samuel chapter 11. Saul faces his first real test when Nahash the Ammonite lays siege to Jabesh Gilead. The men of Jabesh beg for a treaty, but Nahash demands a cruel price, a pact that would bring shame upon all of Israel. The elders ask for 7 days to send messengers throughout the land. If no one comes to save them, they will surrender. Messengers reach Saul's hometown and deliver the news. The people lift up their voices and weep openly. Saul returns from the field, hears the crying, and learns what happened. The Spirit of God rushes upon him. His anger flares hot. He butchers a yoke of oxen and sends pieces across Israel with a stark, urgent warning. Whoever refuses to follow Saul and Samuel will see their own oxen suffer the same fate. Fear of the Lord grips the people. They gather as one man. Saul prepares his forces, promising salvation for Jabesh-Gilead by the next afternoon. The men of Jabesh trick Nahash, promising to surrender tomorrow. But Saul divides his army into three, launching a surprise attack at dawn. The Ammonites are crushed, left completely scattered. This victory shifts the national mood in Saul's favor. The people urge Samuel to bring out those who doubted Saul, demanding their deaths. But Saul shuts it down. He declares, "No one will be killed today, because the Lord has rescued Israel." In this moment, Saul starts strong. He gives credit to the Lord and shows restraint. He refuses to use his new power to settle petty scores. Samuel calls everyone to Gilgal to renew the kingdom. They make Saul king before the Lord, offering sacrifices and rejoicing together. Israel has crossed a historic line. They have essentially rejected God's direct rule, insisting on a king like the nations around them. God warned them, yet granted their wish, choosing Saul, a man who matched their superficial desires. Saul is anointed in secret, chosen in public, and proven in battle. Yet the story plants a question that will haunt the coming chapters. Will this king submit to the Lord's authority? Or will the throne become a place where human pride overrides obedience? The kingdom is established at Gilgal. Saul tastes his first victory, and the nation cheers. But before the story moves on, Samuel steps up one more time, not to praise human power, but to remind Israel that a king never replaces obedience to God. In 1 Samuel chapter 12, Samuel addresses all Israel. He is old now, speaking like a faithful witness at the end of a life of service. He asks them to testify before the Lord and his king. Whose ox have I taken? Whose donkey? Whom have I cheated or defrauded? Whom have I oppressed? From whose hand have I taken a bribe? The people admit that Samuel has never cheated them. He never oppressed them or took a thing. This moment is vital because Samuel is drawing a line between his own record and the corruption that ruined Israel's previous leadership. Think of Eli's sons, who stole what belonged to God. Samuel's own sons failed, yet Samuel himself remains blameless. His words carry weight because his life matches his message. Then Samuel turns their eyes backward. He speaks of the Lord who raised up Moses and Aaron to lead their fathers out of Egypt, and who delivered them every time they cried out. He points to their pattern. They forget God, fall to enemies, cry out, and God sends a Savior. Gideon, Barak, Jephthah, and Samuel himself all stand as witnesses to God's mercy throughout their troubled history. Finally, Samuel calls out their present sin. When Nahash attacked, they demanded a human king to rule them, even though the Lord their God was already their king. God granted their request, but the terms of the covenant remain unchanged. If they fear the Lord, serve him, and obey his voice without rebelling, both they and their king will stay under his blessing. But if they disobey, the Lord's hand will turn against them. To prove the weight of his words, Samuel calls on the Lord, and God sends thunder and rain during the wheat harvest. The people are terrified, finally recognizing that asking for a king was a sin. They beg Samuel to pray for them. He tells them not to be afraid, but to stay on the path. The warning is stern, but there is hope. God will not abandon his people for the sake of his great name. Samuel promises he will not sin by failing to pray for them. This isn't a final exit for Samuel. It is Samuel laying down the foundation for how the monarchy must function. Israel has a king, but the king is not above the law. Political power must bow before the word of the Lord. From here, Saul will be tested. It isn't about his height or his courage, but his obedience. The story moves to chapter 13, and the test hits immediately. Saul gathers his troops. Jonathan, his son, strikes the Philistine garrison at Gilboa, and the news ignites the land. Saul blows the trumpet, and Israel hears they have become an enemy to the Philistines. The Philistines rally with chariots and horsemen. Their troops are like sand on the shore, an overwhelming force. The Israelites know they are in deep trouble. People are hiding in caves, pits, and tombs. Some flee across the Jordan. Saul waits at Gilgal, and his men are trembling. He waits 7 days for Samuel, just as planned. But when the prophet fails to show, the people start slipping away. Fear grips the king. His army is dissolving. The enemy is closing in. Still no sign of Samuel. So Saul orders the sacrifices. He offers the burnt offering himself. Just as he finishes, Samuel arrives. The timing is brutal. It was a test of faith, not just action, but patience. Samuel asks what happened. Saul admits his army was scattering. With Samuel gone and the Philistines massing, he says he felt forced to offer the sacrifice himself. Samuel calls it foolish. He says Saul broke the Lord's command. Proper obedience would have secured his throne forever. But now his reign is finished. God has already sought a man after his own heart to lead his people. This wasn't just about ritual protocol. It revealed Saul's heart under pressure. He feared losing his men more than displeasing God. He used religion to fix a political mess. But in Israel, you cannot substitute rituals for true trust. Saul craved God's favor, but refused to wait for his timing. His army is tiny, and the Philistines hold every advantage. In fact, there isn't a single blacksmith in all of Israel. The Philistines made sure of that, blocking any chance of weapons. On the day of battle, only Saul and Jonathan even have swords. Israel's weakness isn't just theory, it is real practical and terrifying. Then in 1 Samuel chapter 14, the story turns to Jonathan. While Saul sits idly by, Jonathan pulls his armor-bearer aside. He plans to strike the Philistine outpost. His words show a spirit the exact opposite of Saul's paralyzing fear. Jonathan says God might work for them, since nothing stops him from saving, whether by many or by few. They begin the climb. The Philistines spot them and taunt them. Jonathan takes it as a sign the Lord has delivered them into their hands. He climbs up on hands and feet. The Philistines fall before them. Suddenly, chaos erupts throughout the enemy camp. The ground shakes. It is a panic sent from God. Saul's scouts watch as the entire Philistine army melts into confusion. Saul realizes someone is missing Jonathan and his armor-bearer. The Israelites rally even those who had defected to the enemy. Everyone hiding in the hills hears the Philistines are breaking, and they join the chase. The Lord saves Israel that day. But Saul's leadership is still unstable. He forces a rash oath on the people. He curses anyone who eats before evening, before he gets his revenge. Exhausted, the people obey. Jonathan didn't hear the order. He finds wild honey, eats it, and feels his strength return. Then he learns of the oath. Jonathan says his father has brought trouble on them all. A greater victory was lost because of that hunger. The starving troops finally rush the spoils and eat meat with the blood breaking the law. Saul builds his first altar, then tries a desperate night raid. God stays silent. Saul decides there must be hidden sin, and the lot falls on his own son Jonathan. Saul is ready to execute his son over the oath. But the people step in, crying out, "Jonathan brought this great salvation. Not a hair of his head shall fall." This chapter exposes Saul's instability. Jonathan acts with pure, gritty faith. He trusts that God works through weakness. Saul just makes impulsive, heavy-handed calls that nearly kill the hero of a day. The contrast between father and son is stark. The narrative pushes toward chapter 15 of 1 Samuel, the moment of Saul's final rejection. Samuel arrives with a word from God. The Lord remembers how Amalek attacked Israel after they left Egypt. Saul is ordered to strike them and destroy everything. It is a harsh command, rooted in ancient history. The judgment on Amalek is heavy and difficult to process. In the Old Testament context, Amalek was a bitter enemy that struck Israel when they were most vulnerable. This is presented as divine justice, not just a petty war. The core of this chapter, however, isn't about cruelty. It's about whether Saul will obey God fully or just reshape his commands to fit his own plans. Saul gathers his forces and wins, but he spares Agag, the enemy king, and keeps the best of the livestock. He only destroys what is worthless. Saul is editing his obedience to suit himself. He obeys when it's easy, but saves what he likes. Then the word of the Lord comes to Samuel. God regrets making Saul king because he turned away. Samuel is heartbroken and cries out to the Lord all night. By morning he finds Saul. He hears the king has been in Carmel setting up a monument to celebrate his own victory. That one detail tells the whole story. The king meant to serve God is now busy building shrines to himself. When Samuel arrives, Saul greets him with a grin, claiming, "I have carried out the command of the Lord." Samuel fires back with a piercing question. "What is this bleating of sheep and lowing of oxen I hear?" Saul quickly shifts the blame. He claims the people brought the animals from the Amalekites. They kept the best to sacrifice to the Lord, but destroyed the rest. Samuel cuts him off. Saul was once humble, but God made him king over Israel. The Lord gave him a mission, yet Saul chose to disobey. Saul insists he obeyed. He claims he destroyed the Amalekites, but the people saved spoil for the Lord. Then Samuel delivers the verdict that defines Saul's downfall. Does the Lord delight in sacrifices more than in obedience? To obey is better than sacrifice. Listening is better than the fat of rams. Rebellion is like the sin of divination. Presumption is like idolatry. Because Saul rejected the word of the Lord, God has rejected him as king. Now Saul confesses, but his words are laced with concern for his image. He admits he feared the people. He begs Samuel to return with him to worship. When Samuel turns to leave, Saul grabs his robe, and it tears. Samuel tells him the Lord has torn the kingdom from him and given it to a better neighbor. Saul begs Samuel to honor him before the elders. Samuel finally agrees, and Saul worships the Lord. Samuel then executes Agag. After that, Samuel heads to Ramah, and Saul returns to his house in Gibeah. Samuel never sees Saul again while he lives, yet he grieves for him, and the Lord regrets making Saul king. Saul's tragedy is now fully exposed. He has military status and royal style, but when tested by God, he twists obedience to serve his own image. 1 Samuel now reveals the central truth. In God's kingdom, leadership is not about charisma or public success. It is about total surrender to the Lord. The story shifts from Saul's rejection toward an unlikely place. The king on the throne has lost God's favor, but the next king is not in a palace. He is in Bethlehem, among sheep, unseen by men, but known by God. In chapter 16, the Lord speaks to Samuel while he mourns. His sorrow is real, but God says it is time to move on. The Lord tells him to take oil and find Jesse in Bethlehem, for he has chosen a new king there. Samuel fears Saul will kill him. The Lord tells him to go with a sacrifice and invite Jesse. The scene is tense. Samuel arrives, and the elders tremble. He assures them he comes in peace to sacrifice. Jesse and his sons are consecrated. They pass before the prophet, starting with Eliab. Eliab looks strong and impressive. Samuel thinks he is the one, but the Lord stops him. Do not look at his height, for I have rejected him. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. This is a key theme of the book. Saul had looked like a king on the outside. He was tall and admired by everyone. But now God is teaching us that Israel's future won't be chosen by public opinion. Jesse's sons keep passing by. Abinadab, Shammah, and others follow. Samuel says the Lord has not chosen these. 7 sons pass, and none are chosen. It is bizarre. The prophet is here. The sacrifice is ready, and the family is gathered, but the chosen one is missing. Samuel asks if these are all his sons. Jesse says the youngest remains, he is out keeping the sheep. David is hidden in his own home. He's not even invited to the ceremony. He is out in the field while his brothers stand before the prophet. Samuel refuses to sit until he arrives. David is brought in. He is ruddy, handsome, and has beautiful eyes. But this time, looks are not the reason for the choice. The Lord says, "Arise and anoint him, for this is he." Samuel anoints David before his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him. This anointing is secret. David does not immediately take the throne, and Israel does not yet know he is king. The oil marks him, but his path will be long and painful. 1 Samuel shows that God's calling can be real long before it becomes visible to the world. The story turns back to Saul. The Spirit of the Lord leaves him, and a harmful spirit troubles him. Saul's servants suggest a musician to play the lyre. Saul agrees, and one man suggests David, son of Jesse. He is a skillful player, a man of war, wise in speech, handsome, and the Lord is with him. So David, the secret king, is brought into the court of the rejected one. Jesse sends gifts, and David enters Saul's service. Saul grows fond of him and makes him his armor-bearer. When the spirit troubles Saul, David plays and brings him relief. The irony is heavy. Saul has no idea the boy comforting him has already been anointed to replace him. David does not arrive by rebellion. He arrives by serving. He does not seize the throne. He plays in the court. The future king enters not with a crown, but with a shepherd's staff. Turn to 1 Samuel 17. Philistine forces mass on one mountain. Israel holds the other. The valley of Elah sits between. Out steps Goliath. Massive, bronze armor, a champion whose very presence screams war to the Israelites. He bellows a challenge. Send one man to fight. If he wins, we serve you. But if I win, you serve us. Morning and evening for 40 days. He parades himself. Saul hears it. The army hears it. And they are terrified. This is the giant's shadow. But the deeper darkness isn't his size. It is the fear gripping Israel. Saul, the tall king, chosen for this very moment, is silent. The royal leader is frozen. Meanwhile, David is still shuttling between the palace and his father's sheep. Jesse sends him from Bethlehem with food for his brothers. David leaves his flock with a keeper and reaches the camp. Soldiers are shouting, lining up for war. David runs to find his brothers. Then Goliath appears, shouting the same threat. The men of Israel scatter. They talk of the king's reward, but David asks a different question. He wants to know who will finally stop this Philistine. Then he asks, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he dares defy the armies of the living God? This is David's heart on display. He doesn't see a military problem. He sees a theological insult. The crisis isn't just that Israel is threatened. It is that God is being mocked before his people. Eliab, his oldest brother, snaps at him. He accuses David of pride and asks why he abandoned his sheep. Eliab sees a meddling younger brother, but we have seen what he missed. God chose the shepherd. The brother who looked the part was passed over, but the one dismissed is speaking with faith. Saul hears. He sends for David. The young shepherd tells the king not to lose heart. I will go fight him. Saul scoffs. You are just a boy. Goliath has been a man of war since his youth. David reaches into his own history. He tells Saul that when a lion or bear grabbed a lamb, he chased it down. He caught the beast and struck it dead. Then David adds, The Lord who saved me from the lion will save me from this Philistine. This isn't arrogance. He isn't leaning on his size or training. He is looking at the battle through the faithfulness of God. The private pasture prepared him for this public valley. The same God who helped him in secret will help him now. Saul tries to dress David in his own armor, a bronze helmet, a heavy coat. David tries to walk, but it is too much. He takes it off. The contrast is clear. David cannot fight as Saul. Victory won't come from borrowed gear or royal pretenses. David grabs his staff, picks 5 smooth stones from the brook, and drops them in his pouch. He approaches with his sling. Goliath stares down at him, shield-bearer at his side. He sees a boy, and he curses David by his gods. He promises to feed David to the birds. David answers, "You come with sword and spear, but I come in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel." David declares the Lord will deliver him today, so the whole earth knows there is a God in Israel. And everyone here will learn that the Lord saves not by sword or spear. The battle is the Lord's. Goliath charges. David sprints toward the line. He reaches into his bag, slings a stone, and nails the Philistine. Goliath crashes down. David has prevailed with a single stone. He runs over, draws the giant sword, and finishes it. Seeing their champion dead, the Philistines break and flee. Israel chases them down. That valley of fear is now a place of victory. Saul had stood still. Israel had trembled, but David's faith shattered the paralysis. Afterward, Saul asks, "Whose son is this?" David stands there, holding the giant's head, saying he is the son of Jesse. The question of his identity hangs in the air. David isn't just a shepherd anymore. He is the Anointed One, the court musician and the defender of the faith. By now, the story is tilted. Saul is still king, but the future belongs to David. God chose the heart no one else saw. He raised a shepherd whose courage was forged in secret. And through David, the book proves that true leadership isn't measured by height or armor, but by faith that sees God bigger than any giant. Once the giant fell, David's reputation soared across Israel. That victory meant to save Saul's kingdom. Instead, fractured his house. David wasn't just a shepherd anymore. He became a hero, loved by the people Jonathan and Michal, but feared by Saul. In 1 Samuel 18, the moment David finished speaking, Jonathan's soul bonded with his. The prince loved David as his own life. Jonathan sealed a covenant, giving David his royal robe, armor, sword, bow, and belt. It was a quiet, profound act. Jonathan saw David not as a rival, but as a brother. This bond became one of the most vital relationships in 1 Samuel. Jonathan was the heir, yet he didn't share his father's jealousy. He chose loyalty over personal ambition. Jonathan proved that true faith recognizes God's choice, even at a cost. David continued to excel in every mission Saul gave him. Saul put him in command, winning the respect of the army and the king's own servants. But when the troops returned, the women sang, praising Saul for thousands, but David for tens of thousands. That song pierced Saul's heart. The text says it made him burn with anger. He brooded, thinking, "They credit David with 10,000, but me with only 1,000. What's left for him but the crown?" From then on, Saul watched him with suspicion. The next day, a dark spirit overwhelmed him while David played the lyre. Saul gripped his spear, while David tried to soothe the king with music. Suddenly, Saul hurled the spear, aiming to pin David to the wall. David dodged it twice. The palace was no longer safe. Saul feared David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from the king. That was the core conflict. Saul kept the throne and title, yet David had God's presence. So Saul reassigned him to lead 1,000 soldiers. David succeeded everywhere he went because the Lord remained with him. Saul saw this and grew terrified. Still, all Israel and Judah loved David. Saul tried to push him away, but it only made David more visible. Saul's obsession for status only boosted David's honor. Then Saul turned to marriage as a trap. He offered his daughter Merab, demanding David fight the Lord's battles. Saul schemed to let the Philistines kill him. David answered humbly, questioning his own worthiness to be royal kin. Yet Merab was given to another. Then Saul heard that his daughter Michal loved David. This pleased him not out of love, but because he saw a new snare to endanger David. Saul demanded a dangerous dowry, hoping the Philistines would finish the job. But David succeeded once again. He became the king's son-in-law. Saul grew even more afraid, seeing God's hand on David and Michal's love for him. David became Saul's permanent enemy. The tragedy deepened as everyone close to the king was drawn to David. David wasn't forcing his rise. God was. Saul couldn't stop it, so his fear turned into a lethal obsession. In 1 Samuel 19, Saul openly ordered his servants and Jonathan to kill David. But Jonathan cherished him. He warned David to hide, then confronted his father, pointing out that David had done nothing but good for them. Jonathan reminded Saul how David risked everything to strike down the Philistine, securing salvation for all Israel. For a moment, Saul listened, even swearing that David would not be killed. Jonathan brought David back, but the peace was fragile. When war flared up again, David defeated the Philistines. Then the dark spirit returned to Saul. As David played the lyre, the king grabbed his spear. Saul threw it, but David slipped away, leaving the spear in the wall. That night, he fled. Saul sent men to ambush his house, but Michal warned David that his life was in danger. She lowered him through a window, then put an idol in his bed to stall the assassins. When Saul found out, he was furious. His own daughter had betrayed him. David ran to Samuel at Ramah. While David and Samuel stayed at Naioth, Saul sent soldiers to capture him. But they found a group of prophets led by Samuel, and the Spirit of God came upon the soldiers, forcing them to prophesy. Saul sent more with the same result. A third group met the same fate. Finally, Saul went himself, and the Spirit overcame him too. This strange turn showed that Saul could not control what belonged to God. His attempts were stopped by the Spirit. The rejected king was still dangerous, but he was not in charge. The Lord was protecting his chosen one. In 1 Samuel 20, David found Jonathan asking, "What have I done? Why is your father trying to kill me?" Jonathan finds it hard to believe his father would kill David in secret. But David knows the danger is real. The feast of the new moon is near. David suggests a test. He will skip the king's table. If Saul asks Jonathan, should say David went to Bethlehem for a family sacrifice. Saul's reaction will show where his heart truly lies. David also reminds him of their sworn covenant. If David is guilty, Jonathan can kill him himself, but he must not hand him over. Jonathan agrees to report the truth, good or bad. Jonathan then asks for steadfast love for his house, even when God cuts off David's enemies. He is looking to the future. Jonathan sees more than Saul admits. David's future is linked to God's plan, and Jonathan wants his family remembered with mercy. They settle on a plan using arrows in a field. Jonathan will shoot and call out to a young boy in code, letting David know if he is safe or if he needs to run. The feast begins. Saul says nothing the first day. On day 2, Saul asks why the son of Jesse is missing. Jonathan gives their planned excuse. Saul's anger explodes at him. He mocks Jonathan, claiming as long as the son of Jesse lives, Jonathan's kingdom will never be secure. Saul orders David brought to him to be killed. Jonathan asks what David has done to deserve death. Saul hurls his spear at his own son. Now Jonathan knows his father is out for blood. The next morning, he meets David in the field, as promised. He shoots the arrows, telling the boy to go further out. The message is clear. David has to leave. After the boy leaves, David emerges from the stone pile. He bows 3 times. They kiss and weep together, David weeping the hardest. Jonathan tells him to go in peace, remembering their oath before the Lord. They part ways. Jonathan heads back to the city. David departs. Their covenant stands, but his path has shifted. David is no longer a servant in the court or a soldier in the army. He is a fugitive. The Anointed One must live outside palace walls, hunted by the king he once served so well. By now, 1 Samuel has bared the emotional core of David's rise. Jonathan's loyalty shows the beauty of faith. Michal's rescue reveals the fractures in Saul's home. Saul's jealousy shows how a heart fighting God destroys itself. David's flight begins his wilderness years. He will be shaped not by comfort, but by rejection, danger, and total reliance on the Lord. David has lost the safety of the palace, his friendship with Jonathan, and his rank in the army. The future king isn't moving toward a throne yet. He is stepping into the wilderness where his faith and his fear and his grasp of God's timing will be tested. He faces cave's enemies and hunger. In chapter 21 of 1 Samuel, David arrives at Nob to see Ahimelech the priest. He is alone, desperate, and running from Saul. He hides the full truth of his situation. Ahimelech trembles, asking why he is alone. David makes up an urgent story and begs for bread. There is only the holy bread from the sanctuary. Ahimelech gives it to him, once assured that David's men are ceremonially clean. This moment shows how far David has fallen from public honor. The hero who beat Goliath now has no food of his own. He must take bread from the sanctuary as a refugee. The priest's mercy saves him. David also asks for a weapon, and Ahimelech gives him the sword of Goliath kept behind the ephod. The trophy from David's greatest battle is back in his hand during his darkest hour. But there is a shadow in the room. Doeg the Edomite, a servant of Saul, is there that day, detained before the Lord. He watches everything. The story keeps him in the frame. What seems like a minor detail in Nob is actually the start of a coming tragedy. David then flees to Achish, king of Gath. This is a shocking move. Gath was Goliath's home city. Carrying Goliath's sword, David seeks refuge among his enemies because Saul has made Israel a death trap. But the servants of Achish recognize him. They recall the songs about him. Saul struck his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Fearing for his life, David acts insane, scratching at the gates and letting spit run down his beard. Achish throws him out, and David escapes. This isn't David at his best. It shows the crushing weight of fear on a man with nowhere left to run. 1 Samuel doesn't paint David as a perfect hero. He is God's chosen servant, still capable of panic, weak choices, and desperation. Yet even in his fragility, God keeps him. The story enters chapter 22. David escapes to the cave of Adullam. His brothers and his father's whole house join him there, but they aren't the only ones. Everyone in debt, everyone in distress, and everyone bitter in spirit gathers around him. David becomes their leader. 400 men in total. This is the birth of David's wilderness community. It isn't made of Israel's elite. It is built from the wounded, the pressured, the desperate, and the broken. The future king starts gathering people who know life outside the halls of power. David then heads to Mizpah in Moab, asking the king to shield his parents until he knows God's plan for him. Even as a fugitive, David protects his family. The prophet Gad tells David to leave the stronghold and enter Judah. David obeys, moving to the forest of Hereth. Meanwhile, Saul sits in Gibeah under a tamarisk tree, spear in hand, surrounded by his men. The image is haunting. Saul sits like a king, but talks like a paranoid man. He accuses his servants of conspiracy. He claims no one pities him, insisting Jonathan turned David against him. Doeg the Edomite speaks up. He tells Saul he saw David at Nob, that Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him, provided food, and gave him the sword of Goliath. Saul summons Ahimelech and all the priests of Nob. Ahimelech answers with dignity. He says David is faithful, the king's son-in-law, captain of the guard, and highly honored in Saul's own house. He cannot grasp why Saul sees treason. Saul does not listen. He orders Ahimelech and all the priests executed. Saul's own servants refuse to strike the priests of the Lord, but Doeg obeys. He kills the priests, and then Canob, the city of the priests, is struck with the sword. This is one of the darkest moments in Saul's reign. The king meant to protect Israel now destroys the servants of the Lord. The contrast is sharp. Saul spared Agag and the best of Amalek's animals despite God's command. Yet he destroys the priests of Nob without a hint of mercy. His obedience failed where God commanded, yet his violence explodes where God gave no command. This is the moral collapse of a king who treats loyalty to David as a greater threat than sin against the Lord. One son of Ahimelech, Abiathar, escapes and flees to David. He tells David exactly what Saul has done. David realizes instantly that Doeg being at Nob was a deadly trap. He takes responsibility for the danger facing Ahimelech's house and tells Abiathar to stay with him. With David, Abiathar will be safe. Saul has slaughtered priests. David takes the surviving priest under his own protection. In chapter 23 of 1 Samuel, David hears the Philistines are attacking Keilah and raiding the threshing floors. Even as a fugitive, David is not self-centered. He seeks the Lord, asking if he should attack the Philistines. The Lord tells him to go and save Keilah. David's men are afraid they are already hunted in Judah. What if they face the Philistine army? David asks again, and the Lord confirms the command. David goes to Keilah, fights the Philistines, strikes them with a great blow, and saves the inhabitants. This is what true kingship looks like before David has a throne. Saul is hunting David, but David is rescuing Israelites. Saul hears David is in Keilah and thinks God delivered David into his hands because the city has gates and bars. Again, Saul uses religious language to justify his own obsession. David asks the Lord if Saul will come and if the men of Keilah will betray him. The Lord says yes to both. So David and his men, now about 600, flee. Saul abandons the expedition once he hears David has slipped away. David remains in the wilderness in mountain strongholds. Saul hunts him daily, but God does not hand him over. Then Jonathan finds David at Horesh and strengthens his faith in God. He tells David not to fear that Saul will not find him. Jonathan says David will be king, and he will be second in command. Even Saul knows this. The two make a covenant before the Lord. Jonathan heads home, while David stays in the wilderness. This is one of the final flickers of light between David and Jonathan. Jonathan cannot end David's suffering, but he anchors him in God. In a story built on pursuit and betrayal, covenant friendship is a gift of courage. The Ziphites then go to Saul and betray David's hiding place. Saul blesses them in the name of the Lord, again cloaking his hunt in religious speech. He tells them to scout David's hiding spots carefully. Saul closes in, and the chase tightens around David. At one point, Saul is on one side of the mountain, while David's men scramble to escape on the other. Tension is high. Saul is closing in. Then a messenger reaches Saul, saying the Philistines have raided the land. Saul abandons his hunt to fight the Philistines. The place is called the Rock of Escape. David then travels from there and lives in the strongholds of En-Gedi. In chapter 24 of 1 Samuel, Saul returns from the Philistines and hears David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. Saul takes 3,000 chosen men to hunt David near the wild goat rocks. Along the way, Saul enters a cave to relieve himself. But David and his men are already hiding in the back of that very cave. David's men see this as providence. They tell David this is the day the Lord promised to give his enemy into his hands. Saul is vulnerable. David is hidden. One strike could end the wilderness years. One secret act could put the throne within reach. David creeps up and cuts off a corner of Saul's robe. Even that troubles his heart. David's conscience strikes him for ruining the robe. He tells his men, the Lord forbid he should do such a thing to his master, the Lord's anointed, by raising a hand against him. David convinces his men and holds them back. This is the first major time David spares Saul's life. The second sparing happens later in 1 Samuel. Here at En-gedi, the lesson is clear. David refuses to seize the kingdom by violence against the Lord's anointed. He trusts God to remove Saul in his time without David becoming guilty. After Saul leaves the cave, David rises and calls out, "My Lord, the king!" David bows with his face to the ground. He asks why Saul listens to men who claim David seeks his harm. Then he shows the corner of the robe, proving he could have killed Saul, but chose not to. David declares he has not sinned against Saul, despite Saul hunting his life. He leaves it to the Lord, saying, "The Lord may judge between us, but my hand will not touch Saul." Saul hears David's voice and weeps. For a moment, the truth cuts through his jealousy. He says, "David is more righteous, for he repaid good, while Saul repaid evil." Saul admits David will surely be king, and that Israel's throne will be established in his hand. He asks David to swear he will not cut off his descendants or destroy his name. David swears this to Saul. Saul heads home, but David and his men retreat to the stronghold. No true reconciliation here. Saul promised peace, but David knows better. He stays clear. Yet David passed a massive test. He held power over his enemy and refused to misuse it. He bypassed revenge for reverence. In the wilderness, David is being forged into a new kind of leader, a man who fights only when needed, protects the vulnerable, and refuses to build his throne on rebellion against God-ordained authority. David remains in the desert, anointed, hunted, and waiting. He already spared Saul once. But the wilderness tests more than just mercy in the face of danger. It tests hunger, anger, and the grace to listen when wisdom disrupts a murderous plan. In 1 Samuel 25, the story turns. Samuel dies. All Israel gathers to mourn the man buried in Ramah, the prophet who heard God as a boy, the man who judged with integrity, who anointed both Saul and David, is gone. An era ends. Israel loses its spiritual North Star. David continues his exile without his mentor. After the funeral, David moves to the wilderness of Paran. Nearby, a wealthy landowner runs a massive operation in Carmel. His name is Nabal. He is rich in livestock, but notoriously harsh. His wife Abigail is the total opposite, brilliant and beautiful. The contrast is sharp. One household, two worlds. One of folly, one of wisdom. David hears Nabal is shearing sheep. This matters because shearing time was meant for feasting and community generosity. David sends men to greet Nabal with respect. They remind him that they protected his shepherds in the wild, keeping his flocks safe and untouched. David asks for whatever Nabal can spare. Nabal replies with pure contempt. He insults David, acting like he is just a runaway slave. He refuses to share even a scrap of bread with these men. It is a public slap in the face, a total dishonor after all the protection David provided. When the men return with that report, David snaps. He tells his warriors to strap on their swords. David grabs his own. 400 men march with him. The king who spared Saul is now set to wipe out Nabal's house over a bitter insult. 1 Samuel shows us a raw human David. He is faithful, but he is not immune to rage. He would not kill Saul, the Lord's anointed, but now he is ready to take personal revenge. The wilderness proves that even a righteous man needs a check on his temper. One of Nabal's servants rushes to Abigail, desperate to explain what happened. He says David's men were like a protective wall day and night, yet Nabal treated them like dirt. Abigail moves fast. She gathers massive supplies: bread, wine, meat, grain, loads it on donkeys, and rides out to meet David. As she approaches, David is mid-rant, fuming that he protected Nabal's assets for nothing. He calls it evil for good. David intends to leave no man standing. Then Abigail appears. She hops off her donkey, hits the dirt, and bows. She speaks with incredible courage, taking the blame and urging David to ignore Nabal, whose very name means fool. She points out that God is keeping David from blood guilt. She offers the gift and speaks a prophecy over his future. She says God will build David a lasting dynasty because he fights for the Lord, and he must not be tainted by sin. She reminds him that when he is finally king, he does not want the memory of needless bloodshed on his conscience. David listens. The rage breaks. He praises God for sending Abigail to intercept him. He honors her wisdom for stopping him from taking revenge. He accepts the gift and sends her home in peace. Back home, Nabal is feasting and drunk. Abigail stays silent until the morning wine wears off. Then she tells him everything. His spirit fails him. He turns to stone. 10 days later, God strikes Nabal, and he dies. When David hears, he sees God's hand in the justice. He sends for Abigail, and she joins him in the wilderness. The story shifts to 1 Samuel 26. David is hunted by Saul once again. The Ziphites tip off Saul. David is hiding at the hill of Hachilah. Saul marches out with 3,000 chosen soldiers to track David down in the desert. Once more, Saul hunts the man he already admitted was innocent. David sends scouts to confirm the threat. David sneaks to Saul's camp. He spots the king sleeping, surrounded by Abner and his army. That night, David asks who will join him in the camp. Abishai volunteers. They slip past everyone as a deep, divinely sent sleep has fallen over the troops. Saul is snoozing with his spear driven into the ground water jar by his side. Abishai whispers that God has finally delivered his enemy into his hand. He begs to pin Saul to the ground with one quick thrust of the spear. It feels like a repeat of the cave, but the temptation is sharper now. Saul's own weapon is right there. The camp is dead to the world. David could end the hunt forever, but he refuses again. He says no one can attack the Lord's anointed and remain clean. The Lord will strike Saul in his own time, in battle or by natural death. David refuses to seize the throne through murder. Instead, he grabs the spear and water jar, slipping away completely unseen. Sparing Saul again proves David's character. He is exhausted, hunted, betrayed, and forced into hiding. Yet he won't mistake opportunity for permission. David knows God's promise isn't a license to use sin as a shortcut. From a safe distance, David shouts to the army, and Abner, rebuking them for guarding the king so poorly. Saul recognizes his voice. David asks why Saul hunts him and what crime he has committed. He says, if the Lord stirred Saul, let God accept a sacrifice. If men did it, let them be cursed for driving him from the Lord's inheritance. Saul confesses again, admitting he has acted like a fool. He begs David to come back, promising safety. David returns the spear and declares, the Lord rewards every man for his faithfulness. Just as David valued Saul's life, today he prays the Lord will value his and rescue him from this distress. Saul blesses him, predicting greatness. David leaves, but he knows Saul's words are hollow. There is no safety here. 1 Samuel chapter 27 finds David talking to himself. He realizes Saul will eventually kill him, and he concludes there is nothing better than fleeing to Philistine territory. Saul will finally stop hunting him in Israel, and David will be safe. This move shows David's total burnout. After years of running, even seeing God's protection hasn't stopped the crushing pressure of being hunted. David takes his 600 men to Achish, the king of Gath. They settle in with their families, including David's wives, Ahinoam and Abigail. When Saul hears David fled to Gath, he gives up the chase. David asks Achish for a local town, and he is given Ziklag. From there, David raids surrounding groups, but he lies to Achish, claiming he is attacking areas loyal to Judah and Israel. Achish believes him, convinced David has made himself an enemy to his own people and will serve him forever. The chapter closes with tension. David is safe from Saul, but he is living under the protection of Israel's enemies. He is surviving, but he is in a morally gray area. The wilderness didn't break him, but this long pressure has pushed him into a dangerous compromise. 1 Samuel is honest about this. The future king is still being guarded by God, but he is tired, calculating, and vulnerable. By now, David has learned hard lessons in the wilderness. Abigail showed him that wise counsel stops a good man from doing wrong. Saul's camp tested his patience, and Ziklag shows that waiting too long can wear down even a faithful heart. David remains the Lord's anointed, but the path to the crown is proving longer and more complex than anyone imagined. The story hits its final, darkest turn. David lives among the Philistines. Saul is spiritually lost. Samuel is dead, and Israel faces a war that will end the first monarchy in tragedy. In 1 Samuel chapter 28, the Philistines gather for battle against Israel. Achish, the Philistine king, expects David to fight. David gives a vague answer, and Achish assumes he will serve as his personal bodyguard. The tension is suffocating. The future king of Israel is trapped in enemy territory, and now the Philistines are marching against his own people. The scene cuts to Saul. The Philistine army camps at Shunem, while Saul rallies all of Israel at Gilboa. Seeing the Philistine army, Saul is terrified, his heart trembling. This fear isn't new, but it is deeper now. Earlier, he feared enemies. Now he fears because God is silent. Saul inquires of the Lord, but gets no answer. No dreams, no Urim, no prophets. Samuel is dead. The voice Saul once ignored is gone. The king who rejected God's word now begs for guidance and finds only silence. Then Saul makes a desperate move. He orders his servants to find a medium so he can inquire through her. This is deeply ironic, as Saul had already cleared the land of mediums and sorcerers. But desperation drives him to the very thing he once banned. His servants find a medium in Endor. At night, Saul goes in disguise with 2 men asking her to summon Samuel. The woman is terrified, knowing Saul killed those who practiced such arts. He swears she will be safe. When Samuel appears, she screams, realizing the man is Saul. Samuel asks why he was disturbed. Saul answers with the agony of a broken man. The Philistines are attacking. God has turned away, offering no answers through prophets or dreams. But Samuel brings no comfort. He says the Lord has done exactly as he said. The kingdom is torn from Saul and given to David because Saul failed to obey the Lord regarding Amalek. Tomorrow, Saul and his sons will be with Samuel, and Israel will fall to the Philistines. This is a difficult scene involving a medium and Samuel's appearance. The text presents this as a real encounter with Samuel, yet it does not validate Saul's actions. Forbidden practices aren't suddenly okay in a crisis. The lesson is that Saul, having rejected God while he had the chance, now chases supernatural shortcuts and finds only judgment. Saul collapses, terrified and weak. He has no strength, having not eaten for a day and night. The woman and his servants finally force him to eat, and he stands up. She cooks for him, and Saul eats before heading back into the night. It is a haunting image, the king of Israel, running, hidden and lost. Terrified and spiritually ruined, he walks toward a battle he knows he will lose. The story turns to David in 1 Samuel chapter 29. The Philistines gather at Aphek, and the Israelites camp by the spring in Jezreel. As the Philistine commanders march, David and his men bring up the rear with Achish. But the Philistine commanders are furious. They do not trust David. They demand to know why these Hebrews are here, warning that David might turn on them in battle to win back Saul's favor. Achish defends David, insisting he has found no fault in him. The commanders refuse to budge. So Achish calls David and tells him to leave. David protests, asking what he has done wrong. Achish insists he must head out at dawn. This is providence at work. David had put himself in a dark place by living among the Philistines. If he fought for them, his future as Israel's king would be stained. If he turned against them during the fight, he would betray Achish. But God closes the door through the suspicions of the Philistine commanders. David is removed from the battlefield before the tragedy at Gilboa. In 1 Samuel chapter 30, David and his men return to Ziklag after 3 days. They arrive to find ruin. The Amalekites have raided the Negev and Ziklag. They burned the city and took every woman and child captive. David's 2 wives, Ahinoam and Abigail, were taken too. David and his men weep until they have no strength left. The grief turns ugly. His own men talk of stoning him, as every heart is bitter over their lost families. David is in deep distress. Yet the text captures one of the most vital moments in the story. David strengthens himself in the Lord his God. He calls for Abiathar the priest to bring the ephod. David asks the Lord if he should pursue the raiders, and if he will succeed. The Lord answers, "Pursue, for you will surely overtake them and rescue the captives." It is a sharp contrast to Saul. Saul seeks guidance and hears only silence due to his rebellion. David, in his darkest hour, turns to the Lord and receives clear direction. David sets out with 600 men, but 200 are too exhausted to cross the Besor brook. David continues with the remaining 400. Along the way they find an Egyptian servant, abandoned by his Amalekite master because he fell ill. David's men give him food and water, and his strength returns. The servant then leads them to the raiding party. David finds the Amalekites scattered, eating and celebrating over the spoils they had taken. David strikes them down from twilight until the evening of the next day. He recovers everything the Amalekites took. Nothing is missing, not the small or the great, not the sons or the daughters, not the plunder. David saves everyone. When he returns to the 200 men who were too tired to fight, some wicked men in his group argue that these men deserve nothing but their families. David refuses. He says they must not behave that way with what the Lord has provided. The share of the warrior must be the same as the share of the one guarding the baggage. David makes this a permanent rule for Israel. Here, David's leadership shines. He seeks the Lord, protects the vulnerable, and rejects bitterness. He shields the exhausted from shame. While Saul collapses, David is shaped into a king who knows victory is a gift from God, not a chance for cruelty. Then 1 Samuel chapter 31 brings us back to the battlefield. The Philistines fight against Israel. The men of Israel flee, and many fall on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines close in on Saul and his sons. Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchi-Shua are killed. The battle presses hard against Saul, and the archers find him. He is badly wounded. Saul tells his armor-bearer to kill him, so the Philistines will not abuse him. The man is too terrified to act. So Saul takes his own sword and falls upon it. Seeing that Saul is dead, The armor-bearer also falls on his sword and dies. Saul, his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and his men all die that day. The defeat spreads when the Israelites see the army has fled and the king is dead. They abandon their cities. The Philistines move in and take over. The next day, the Philistines find the bodies of Saul and his sons. They cut off Saul's head, strip off his armor, and spread the news throughout their land. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth and fasten his body to the wall of Bethshan. The humiliation is complete. The king Israel demanded to fight their battles has fallen in battle. A monarchy born in celebration ends with bodies on an enemy wall. Saul's story reaches the conclusion his disobedience had been moving toward for chapters. But the book does not end with a Philistine victory. When the people of Jabesh-Gilead hear what the Philistines did to Saul, brave men rise and walk through the night. They take the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall and bring them to Jabesh. There they burn the bodies and gather the bones. They bury them under the tamarisk tree and fast for 7 days. This act matters. Early in his reign, Saul rescued these same people from the Ammonites. Now, in his death, the men of Jabesh honor him with courage. 1 Samuel does not ignore Saul's failures, but it also remembers his early service. His end is tragic, yet his body is not left in shame. By the end, the throne is empty. Saul is dead. Jonathan is dead. The old order has collapsed on Mount Gilboa. Yet David is alive, preserved by God, strengthened in the Lord, and ready for the next stage of Israel's history. The book closes with grief, but also with hope. The king of human desire has fallen, and the way is open for the king after God's heart. And so, we reach the end of our journey through the first book of Samuel. If you have watched this far, I want you to treat this not just as the end of a video, but as a moment of reflection. Comment below, I understood the message of 1 Samuel. My heart must obey the Lord above all. This is more than just a phrase. It is a declaration. You have seen the warning of Saul, the faith of Hannah, the calling of Samuel, and the rise of David. You understand that God does not judge by appearance like people do. He looks at the heart. He sees what is hidden. He lifts up the humble. He resists the proud. He honors those who trust his word. 1 Samuel is more than battles and kings. It is the story of what happens when people reject God, and what happens when one faithful heart finally chooses to listen. Samuel heard the voice of the Lord in a dark generation. Saul stood tall before men, but he failed because he feared people more than God. David was hidden, yet chosen. What part of this book moved you most? Was it Hannah praying through her pain, or Samuel learning to hear the voice of the Lord? Was it the tragedy of Saul, who had position but lost his way? Was it David facing Goliath with faith, not human strength? Or was it seeing how God's promises passed through deserts, tears, and long seasons of waiting before they reached the throne? Share it below. Your testimony might strengthen someone else who is currently learning to trust God in a difficult season. I pray this journey through 1 Samuel is not just another video, but a spiritual marker for you. May you learn to obey His voice under pressure. May He guard you from the fear of others. May He give you the faith of Hannah and the listening heart of Samuel, the courage of Jonathan, and the trust of David who waited on God's timing. But before we finish, I have to speak to you personally. Maybe listening to this story makes you see your own life. Maybe you have been trying to run things without surrendering to God. Perhaps you have relied on your own success control or the approval of others. Perhaps, like Saul, you have heard God calling, but kept delaying your obedience. Do not ignore the voice of the Lord. Today, the same God who raises the humble and restores the broken is calling you to return to Him. The heart of that invitation is Jesus Christ. He is the true King, the Son of David, who obeyed perfectly where everyone else failed. He died for our sins, rose again, and now calls us to new life. If you want to surrender everything to God, pray with me. Lord Jesus, I need you. I confess my sins to you. I believe that you died for me and rose again. Forgive me, cleanse my heart, and lead me from this day on. I do not want to live by pride. I want to follow your voice. My life is yours. Amen. If you prayed that, do not stay silent. Write in the comments, I surrender my life to the true King, Jesus Christ. May the Lord bless you, protect you, strengthen your faith, and teach you how to walk in obedience. Until next time, keep listening to His Word. The story does not end here. The throne is empty. David is rising. The book of 1 Samuel starts somewhere quiet, far from the noise of palaces, armies, and thrones. Before Israel hears a prophet, before a king is ever anointed, before the nation finds its new shape, the story begins in a broken home with a woman who cannot have children and a prayer born from deep grief.